FBI, we have a search warrant for your electronic devices.
What? I didn't do anything.
Cameron Nicholas Curry kept his own records of exactly what he'd stolen from his employer, and those records became the government's case. By the end of this video, a federal jury will have convicted him on all 6 counts.
We're here to seize your computer and any other digital storage devices. You have the right to remain silent.
Okay. Can I call my lawyer?
The Coinbase account that received the ransom money was opened with his real name, his real social security number, and 2 debit cards linked to it, one in his mother's name, one in his sister's. 5 months earlier, Brightly Software had handed him a laptop, a login, and unsupervised access to the payroll records of more than 700 employees. By the time the FBI knocked on his apartment door in Charlotte, the company had already wired him approximately $2.5 million in cryptocurrency, and Cameron Nicholas Curry was sitting on his couch, typing one more threat into the same email account he had used the entire time. Quick question before we get into this one. How many people at your job have access to your home address, your social security number, and your exact salary right now? Think about that number. Drop it in the comments. And if you're new here, hit subscribe. This channel covers the cases where the person inside the building turns out to be the threat. Cameron Nicholas Curry was born in 1998 in Charlotte, North Carolina, the older of 2 children in a working middle-class family that lived in a brick ranch house in the Idlewild neighborhood east of Independence Boulevard. His mother worked as an office manager for a regional dental practice. His father worked in HVAC installation, often pulling 10-hour shifts during the summer heat that defines a Charlotte August. Money was not tight, but it was watched. Cameron's parents kept a spreadsheet on the refrigerator tracking utility bills, gas mileage, and the kids' school lunch accounts. He grew up around the language of budgets and balances. From an early age, he was the family's resident computer kid. When the household Dell developed a virus, Cameron was the one who scrubbed it. When his grandmother could not figure out how to attach a photo to an email, Cameron walked her through it on the cordless phone. His sister, 4 years younger, would later tell investigators that she remembered him as patient, sarcastic, and almost surgically precise about anything involving a keyboard. He was not the popular kid. He was the one teachers asked for help when the projector in the classroom would not connect. He attended Independence High School in East Charlotte and graduated in 2016 with a 3.4 grade point average. His yearbook listed 2 activities: the robotics club, where he served as the lead programmer his senior year, and the audio-visual crew, where he ran the soundboard for the spring musical. A guidance counselor's notation in his file described him as quietly capable and highly self-directed but reluctant to ask for help. Another evaluation from a junior year computer science teacher called him the strongest natural coder I have taught in 9 years. He enrolled at the University of North Carolina at Charlotte in the fall of 2016, majoring in computer science. He worked through college, 25 hours a week at a Best Buy Geek Squad counter on University Boulevard, troubleshooting laptops, replacing screens, restoring deleted iCloud photos for tearful customers. His starting wage was $11.25 an hour. By his senior year, he had been promoted to a covert ops agent, the Geek Squad's term for the technicians who handled on-site small business work, and his wage had climbed to $15.75. His Best Buy performance reviews described him as detail-oriented, reliable under pressure, and a strong candidate for store-level leadership. He turned the leadership track down. He told his manager he was going into enterprise software. He graduated UNC Charlotte in May 2020 into the strange flat job market of the first pandemic summer. His first salaried role was as a junior business intelligence analyst at a logistics startup in South End, $62,000 a year, fully remote, working out of the second bedroom of a 1-bedroom apartment he shared with a college roommate near the Lynx Blue Line. He built dashboards. He wrote SQL queries. He learned the specific grammar of corporate data, how it was warehoused, who controlled access, what an internal audit looked like, and which folders nobody ever opened twice. the startup laid off 40% of its workforce in the spring of 2022. Cameron was in the second wave of cuts. He took the severance, 6 weeks of pay, and began contracting. Through a third-party recruiting firm based in Raleigh, he was placed first at a regional insurance company doing claims data analysis, then at a logistics platform in Atlanta, then back home to North Carolina in August of 2023 for a 6-month contract at a software company called Brightly. The Brightly contract paid him $72 an hour, which worked out to roughly $140,000 annualized, the most money he had ever made. He told his mother on a Sunday phone call that the role felt like a promotion in everything but title. He told his sister, who was finishing her own degree at East Carolina, that if he could land a full-time conversion after the 6 months, he would finally buy a house. He sent her a screenshot of a Zillow listing in Plaza Midwood, a small bungalow with a tin roof and a fenced backyard, and texted, "This is the one." He was 25 years old when he signed the contract. He was 26 when he sent the first email. Brightly Software is the kind of company most people have never heard of, and yet quietly touches their daily life. Originally founded as School Dude in Cary, North Carolina, the company built maintenance and facilities management software for school districts. Over 2 decades, it expanded into a broader asset management platform serving hospitals, manufacturing plants, municipal governments, and universities. In August of 2022, Siemens acquired Brightly for $1.5 billion, folding it into the German conglomerate's Smart Infrastructure division. By 2023, Brightly had more than 700 employees and over 12,000 client organizations worldwide. The company was now a publicly traded subsidiary of a publicly traded multinational, which meant that anything material that happened inside its network was, in regulatory terms, the SEC's business. It also meant that Brightly carried the kind of internal data a company that size accumulates over 20 years. Payroll records for every employee past and present, compensation bands, performance reviews, home addresses, dates of birth, social security numbers, banking information, executive bonus structures, and a layered map of who reported to whom across a global org chart. Every one of those records lived on the corporate network. To do their job, to build the dashboards, run the reports, audit the data pipelines, analysts needed broad access to it. That was not unusual. That was the trade-off every modern enterprise made. You hired people whose entire function required them to see the inside of the machine, and you trusted them because there was no other way to run a company at scale. For full-time employees, Brightly's onboarding process layered the access slowly: background checks, reference calls, manager-approved permission requests, quarterly access audits, annual security training. For contractors, the process was faster and thinner. A third-party recruiter vetted the candidate. The hiring manager signed off on a scope of work. IT provisioned a laptop, a corporate email, and a permission set tailored to the contract. But tailored loosely, because contractors needed to ramp up in days, not weeks, and the people supervising them often did not know precisely which folders they would need until the work was underway. Cameron Curry was provisioned with access to a directory called HR Analytics, a SharePoint site called Payroll Operations, and a finance shared drive that included compensation models for every full-time employee at Brightly. The provisioning ticket was approved in under 48 hours. Nobody set a calendar reminder to revoke that access on December 15th, the date his contract was scheduled to end. Nobody set a calendar reminder to monitor his download activity in the days approaching that end. The access lived in the system, and the system trusted the man it had been told to trust. This is the part of the story that everybody who has ever worked in tech recognizes. The breach was not a hacker climbing a fence. The breach was a key card the company handed out at the front door, and a door that nobody ever thought to lock behind the person walking out. The first signs that Cameron Curry was preparing something came not in his behavior, but in his download logs, and the logs would not be reviewed until later. Beginning in late September of 2023, roughly 6 weeks into his contract, his pull volume from the HR Analytics directory began to climb. In a normal week, an analyst in his role might query and export between 40 and 60 individual reports. Cameron's logs showed 240 exports in the first week of October, 310 the second week, 480 by the end of the month. Nobody noticed. Nobody was watching. The pulls were happening on a corporate laptop, from a corporate VPN, by a credentialed user doing what looked, in the aggregate, like the work of an unusually productive analyst. What investigators would later reconstruct from forensic imaging of his devices was that Cameron Curry was systematically copying corporate data to a personal external hard drive and to a cloud storage account he had opened under a slight variation of his own name. The files included payroll spreadsheets, names, dates of birth, home addresses, social security numbers, base salaries, bonus targets, equity grants for every Brightly employee. They included internal HR memos discussing layoffs and reorganizations. They included compensation models showing exactly which executives were due to receive bonuses in the upcoming fiscal year, and exactly which ones were not. On December 5, 2023, his manager called him into a video meeting and told him that his contract would not be renewed. The conversation lasted 9 minutes. The manager told him the decision was budgetary, that his work had been strong, that they would be glad to serve as a reference. Cameron thanked her, said he understood, and asked when his last day would be. December 15th, she said. 10 more days. He did not argue. He did not push back. He returned to his home office, opened a fresh browser window, and created an Outlook email account using the Handle Loot software. He chose a display name. He chose it carefully. The display name was simply Loot. The data that Cameron Curry had spent 5 months exfiltrating did not need any further preparation. He had screenshots ready, clean, high-resolution images of spreadsheets showing rows of employee names alongside their personal details and their salaries. He had a list of executive email addresses. He had a list of internal company addresses for the legal team, the security team, the human resources leaders. He had, in effect, a target list and a payload sitting on a hard drive in the home office of an apartment in Charlotte, North Carolina. His last day at Brightly was December 15th, 2023. His corporate laptop was scheduled to be returned by courier. He spent that morning closing tickets, signing off in Slack, and saying polite goodbyes to colleagues who told him they were sorry to see him go. By that evening, his access had been formally revoked. The system had done what the system was supposed to do. At the end of his contract, the door was closed. The problem was that the data had already left the building. On December 10th, 2023, 5 days before his contract officially ended, Cameron Curry sent the first email. It went to a small group of Brightly executives and a handful of HR addresses. It came from Loot Software at Outlook.com. The subject line was simple, almost bureaucratic. The body of the message identified the sender as Loot. It explained in calm and almost reasonable prose that Loot and his partners had obtained sensitive corporate data from Brightly Software, that they considered this data to be a matter of public concern, and that they were prepared to release it publicly unless Brightly agreed to pay them $2.5 million in cryptocurrency. Attached to the email were screenshots. They were not bluffs. They showed real spreadsheets, real names, real home addresses, real dates of birth, real compensation figures for executives the recipients of the email worked with daily. The screenshots were the proof of life. They told Brightly's leadership, within the first 60 seconds of reading the message, that Loot had what he claimed to have, and that he had a lot more of it. In the days that followed, the emails escalated. Between December 11, 2023 and January 24, 2024, Curry would send more than 60 messages. Some went to executives, some went to rank-and-file employees, naming them individually and showing them their own data. Some went to the legal department. He framed the campaign as an act of corporate accountability. He wrote, in one message, that Loot and our partners aim to ensure that everyone is being paid accordingly. He cast the leak as a salary transparency initiative. He used the language of pay equity to dress up extortion. And then he got personal. In one email, he singled out a specific member of the company's legal team, noting that this employee had not received a bonus, while most senior employees had. He included that employee's name. He included the bonus figures of the people who had received them. He turned private compensation data into a targeted humiliation, sent directly to the inbox of the person it referenced. In another email, he reminded Brightly leadership that as a publicly traded company, they had disclosure obligations to the Securities and Exchange Commission, and he threatened to report the breach himself if his demands were not met. The man writing these emails was sitting at the same desk, in the same apartment, where he had been doing the work for the last 5 months. The catalyst was not a single dramatic event. It was the slow, methodical decision by a Fortune subsidiary's leadership team to do exactly what Cameron Curry was counting on them to do. And then, quietly, in the background, to do the one thing he had not planned for. On December 14th, 2023, 4 days after the first loot email arrived, Brightly Software notified the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The company looped in outside counsel. It convened an emergency response team that included its general counsel, its chief information security officer, a forensic incident response firm based in Washington, and a small group of senior executives at the parent company level inside Siemens. By the time the second wave of loot emails began arriving on December 18th, the FBI's Charlotte field office had already opened a case file. The company's external counsel made a recommendation. They told Brightly that the leverage loot had was severe, that the leak of payroll and personally identifiable information for over 700 employees would constitute a regulatory event of significant magnitude, and that the immediate priority was containment. The FBI did not object to a payment, because in cases like this, a payment is sometimes the cleanest way to slow an attacker down, surface their wallet, and turn an active extortion into a forensic trail. In mid-January of 2024, Brightly transferred cryptocurrency to the wallet address Cameron Curry had provided. The public record is muddled on the exact figure. One report described a payment of approximately $2.5 million, the full demand. Another described a payment of $7,540 in Bitcoin, a smaller settlement against a larger demand. What is not disputed is that money changed hands. What is not disputed is that the moment the money landed in the loot wallet, the wallet stopped being anonymous. Cameron Curry had made a mistake. He had made it the day he opened the cryptocurrency exchange account he intended to use to receive the ransom. He had registered the account at Coinbase, one of the largest and most heavily regulated exchanges in the United States. To open the account, he had supplied his real name, his real social security number, his real date of birth, and a real residential address in Charlotte. He had linked the account to 2 debit cards. One belonged to his mother. One belonged to his sister. It is possible, watching this case from the outside, to feel a strange kind of vertigo at this detail. The man who had spent 5 months meticulously exfiltrating sensitive data, who had drafted his emails carefully enough to invoke SEC disclosure rules and the language of pay equity, who had selected the alias Loot with what one prosecutor would later call a degree of theatrical flair, had set up the receiving end of the entire operation on an exchange that performs identity verification on every new account, with debit cards belonging to 2 of the people closest to him on the planet. It is the operational security of a man who, at some level, did not believe he could be caught. The FBI's forensic accountants did not need to do anything clever. The cryptocurrency wallet that received the Brightly payment was traced through the blockchain in hours, not days. The wallet belonged to a Coinbase account. The Coinbase account had been opened by Cameron Nicholas Curry. The Coinbase account was linked to debit cards in the names of his mother and his sister. The Coinbase account had been accessed repeatedly from an IP address registered to a residential broadband line at an apartment complex in Charlotte, North Carolina, the same apartment complex where Curry lived. While the financial trail was being mapped, a parallel team was pulling apart the metadata of the loot emails themselves. The header information on the messages contained, embedded in technical fields that a non-technical attacker would not think to scrub, identifiers that linked the outgoing traffic to the same residential IP. The Outlook account itself had been registered with a recovery phone number. The recovery phone number was a Charlotte area code. The Charlotte area code phone number had been ported 6 months earlier from a T-Mobile account in the name of Cameron Curry. The man who had presented himself as loot, who had threatened, in his own emails, to release the data if law enforcement got involved, had not used a VPN consistently. He had not used a separate device. He had not used a burner phone. He had drafted some of the extortion emails on the same laptop he had been issued by Brightly, which had been imaged by IT during a routine return procedure that he had failed to anticipate. The FBI obtained a search warrant for Cameron Curry's apartment on January 23, 2024. They obtained a parallel warrant for his electronic accounts. They obtained subpoenas for his financial records. By the morning of January 24th, the case against him was effectively complete. The wallet, the IP, the metadata, the imaged laptop, the recovery phone number, the debit cards in his mother's and sister's names. Investigators had the entire picture before they ever knocked on his door. We're heading into the search warrant now. Before we do, if this case is keeping your attention, that's because it deserved to be told properly. Subscribe and stick around. The next part of this video is the one Cameron Curry did not see coming. What they did not know, what they could not have known until they got there, was that Cameron Curry was going to watch them coming up the stairs. And then, with federal agents standing in the hallway outside his apartment, he was going to open his laptop and send one more email. It was a Wednesday morning, January 24th, 2024, just before 9 a.m. Charlotte was cold and gray. A team of FBI special agents, accompanied by an evidence technician and 2 local officers from the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department, climbed the exterior staircase of Curry's apartment building on the east side of the city. They were carrying the signed warrant, the body cameras, and the protocols they had prepared for an in-residence arrest of a suspect whose primary weapon was a keyboard. They knocked. They identified themselves. They told him to open the door. Cameron Curry did not open the door. Inside the apartment, what the agents could not see, and what would only be reconstructed later from server logs and time-stamped emails, Cameron Curry was sitting at the same 3-monitor desk he had been working at for months. He had heard the knock. He had looked through the peephole. He had walked back to his keyboard. He had opened a fresh Outlook Compose window. He had typed. The email he sent, the final loot email, went to Brightly Software's executive team. It was time-stamped from inside his apartment, with FBI agents on his doorstep. It warned the company that if Cameron Curry were arrested today, the full dataset would be published online, immediately and irrevocably. It was a threat sent in real time from the man who had just been formally placed under federal investigation, while the agents who were investigating him stood on the other side of his front door. For the next several minutes, the standoff continued. Through the door, an agent told him calmly that the warrant was valid, that the building was secure, that the safest path for everyone was for him to come out. He refused. When agents finally entered the apartment, they found him at the desk, hands up, eyes wide. The laptop still open on the Compose window of the email he had just sent. The lead agent, identified in court filings only by initials, addressed him directly. Cameron Curry? Yes. Step away from the keyboard. Curry hesitated. He looked at the screen. He looked at the agent. Am I under arrest? Step away from the keyboard, sir. He stood. He raised his hands. The agent secured the laptop, the desktop tower, 2 external hard drives, an iPhone, an iPad, and a small lockbox containing 2 old phones he had not used in months, but had not erased. Within an hour, every device in the apartment was in an evidence bag. Within a day, the contents of every device were being imaged in a federal lab. He did not say anything else of substance. He asked, on the way out, whether his mother had been contacted. He was told that she had not. He nodded once and did not speak again until his attorney arrived. The case moved fast. On September 27, 2024, in the United States District Court for the District of Columbia, before U.S. District Judge Gia M. Cobb, Cameron Nicholas Curry pleaded guilty to one count of felony interstate extortion under 18 U.S.C. paragraph 875D. The plea was negotiated by Assistant United States Attorneys Christine Macy and Joseph Misher of the U.S. Attorney's Office for the District of Columbia. The plea allocution, as reflected in the docket, was brief. Curry acknowledged that he had transmitted communications with the intent to extort, that he had received cryptocurrency in exchange for the threat, and that he had done so knowingly. What happened next is one of the stranger turns in the case. In June of 2025, after the plea had been entered but before sentencing, the United States Attorney's Office for the Western District of North Carolina brought a separate indictment against Curry, charging him with 6 counts of transmitting interstate communications with intent to extort. The District of Columbia case was effectively superseded by the North Carolina prosecution, which captured the breadth of the campaign more completely, count by count, email by email. The case went to trial on March 17, 2026, in the United States District Court for the Western District of North Carolina, before U.S. District Judge Kenneth D. Bell. The government called a relatively short list of witnesses, an FBI special agent who walked the jury through the metadata trail, a forensic examiner from the Bureau's Charlotte field office who explained the Coinbase account and the debit cards, a Brightly information security officer who described the exfiltration logs, and 2 employees who had received personally targeted loot emails. One of those employees was the legal team member Curry had singled out by name in his message about bonuses. She testified that she had not been able to sleep through a night for weeks after the email arrived, that she had moved her family to a hotel for 3 days because she did not know what else Loot knew about her home, and that her sister had stopped letting the children play in the front yard. The defense called no witnesses. Curry did not take the stand. His lead attorney argued, in closing, that there was no evidence Cameron Curry's life had been one of premeditated criminality, that he had been a contractor in a precarious position who had made one extraordinarily bad decision, and that the data he had taken had never actually been published, never actually been sold, never actually reached anyone outside Brightly itself. He framed it as extortion without a leak. Coercion stopped before it could harm anyone beyond the company. The prosecution closed differently. They walked the jury through the 60-plus emails. They displayed the screenshots Curry had attached: real names, real birthdays, real home addresses, real salaries. They reminded the jury that one of those names had belonged to the legal team member testifying earlier in the trial. They reminded them that the language of salary transparency in the emails had been used as cover for a $2.5 million demand. They reminded them, finally, of the email Curry had sent while federal agents stood outside his door, threatening to publish the data if he were arrested. The jury was out for less than 4 hours. On March 19, 2026, the jury returned with guilty verdicts on all 6 counts. Each count carried a statutory maximum of 2 years in federal prison, for a total maximum exposure of 12 years. At the time of this recording, Cameron Nicholas Curry has not yet been sentenced. His sentencing date is pending before Judge Bell, who is expected to weigh the federal sentencing guidelines, the loss amount, the harm to identified victims, the defendant's lack of criminal history, and the aggravating factor of the threats he sent while under active federal investigation. What is already in the record, however, is the judge's response to a defense motion filed shortly before trial, a motion that argued, in part, that Curry's conduct had been driven by a kind of misguided ideological framing about pay equity rather than by personal greed. Judge Bell denied the motion with a written order. In it, he wrote that any defendant who threatens the privacy and physical safety of more than 700 working people, who singles out individual employees by name in order to humiliate them in their own inboxes, who sends real-time threats from inside his apartment as federal agents stand at his door, has forfeited any claim to ideological cover. The court, he wrote, will not allow extortion to be relabeled as activism. At Brightly Software, the breach prompted a complete restructuring of contractor access protocols. Every contractor permission set is now scoped to specific datasets rather than directory-level access. Every contractor download log is reviewed weekly. Every contractor offboarding includes a mandatory 30-day post-departure access audit. The employees whose data was attached to the loot emails were offered 5 years of identity theft monitoring. Several of them have left the company. The legal team member who Curry singled out by name no longer works in Charlotte. In the family home in Idlewild, on the east side of the city where Cameron Nicholas Curry grew up, troubleshooting his grandmother's email and running the soundboard for the spring musical, his mother still answers the phone when reporters call. She has stopped commenting. The 2 debit cards that were used to set up the Coinbase account, one in her name, one in her daughter's, were closed by the bank within 48 hours of the federal indictment. She has not spoken publicly about why her son used them. The cards sit, presumably, in an evidence file in a federal building, alongside the laptop and the hard drives and the printed out emails signed loot. The contract was for 6 months. The company had handed him a laptop, a login, and the keys to 700 lives. He gave them all back, eventually. He just took copies first. This case was something else. But the case on the right-hand side of your screen, that one is on a level I genuinely did not believe was possible until I started reading the file.